Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about mental illness, nor was it merely a revelation about human behavior that could be easily categorized or treated. What he uncovered was far subtler, far deeper, and far more consequential. He discovered a rare type of human consciousness, a form of perception so acute, so finely tuned, that it allowed certain individuals to see and understand layers of reality that others could not even imagine. In his clinical practice, Jung documented patients who possessed what he referred to as highly differentiated perception, a form of awareness so sophisticated that it penetrated the social facades, illusions, and unspoken agreements that govern everyday life. These individuals could read micro-expressions that others would miss entirely, sense the faintest shifts in mood or tension, and intuitively understand hidden motivations and psychological patterns that escaped the notice of everyone around them. These were not ordinary intuitives, nor were they simply empathetic people. Their perception went beyond empathy into a realm of heightened awareness where they could instantly detect deception, feel the unspoken anxieties of a room, or recognize the unacknowledged emotional wounds of those around them. Jung noted that such people often experienced a profound disconnect with society, not because they were unstable, nor because they were ill, but because their very awareness made them different, set apart, and often misunderstood. For them, ordinary social interactions became exhausting. Small talk, casual pleasantries, and the implicit untruths that structure social life were sources of constant tension. Every word spoken by another person was dissected, every gesture analyzed, every hidden intention perceived. This extraordinary clarity, while a remarkable gift, carried with it a psychological weight that most people could neither recognize nor bear. Jung's observations revealed a paradox. The more perceptive an individual, the greater the cost. Their extraordinary abilities to see what others could not made them socially isolated and psychologically burdened. They were often exhausted by the sheer volume of unconscious information they absorbed daily. In many cases, these individuals found it difficult or even impossible to maintain friendships, romantic relationships, or stable employment. Their presence could disrupt the subtle social agreements that allow groups to function because they perceived and, even unintentionally, reflected back the unconscious truths that others worked hard to ignore. Jung realized that the danger did not lie in the perception itself, but in the collision between this heightened awareness and the collective denial of society. What made this discovery especially alarming, Jung found, was that society itself is largely unprepared to deal with such perception. Most people operate under shared illusions, selectively ignoring certain truths to maintain cohesion, comfort, and identity. But the highly perceptive individual sees through these illusions not with malice or intent, but simply because their consciousness cannot help but perceive what is present. They become mirrors reflecting the unconscious contents of those around them, and in doing so, they risk alienation, resentment, and even projection from others. This is why Jung called the phenomenon dangerous, not because the individuals were flawed, but because their extraordinary consciousness had the potential to isolate, overwhelm, and even destroy them if not carefully integrated. In essence, Jung's insight was revolutionary. He showed that consciousness can exceed collective readiness, and that rare individuals who see more than others are walking on a psychological edge. They hold a power that can be transformative, both for themselves and for society, but only if they learn to navigate the social and psychic perils that come with it. Without guidance, without understanding, these exceptional minds can burn out under the weight of the truths they perceive, experiencing a psychic strain that is invisible to anyone else, yet profoundly real for them. Segment 2, Expanded Version. The case that first revealed Jung's most dangerous discovery began with a patient he encountered in 1913 during a period of intense personal reflection following his professional and intellectual separation from Freud. She was a highly introverted, intuitive type, a rare personality whose very presence seemed to carry a tension that others could feel but not understand. From the moment she entered the room, Jung noticed something extraordinary. She perceived the psychological atmosphere with uncanny accuracy. She could immediately sense who was withholding their true thoughts, who harbored secret resentments, and who was quietly suffering emotional pain. Her capacity was not merely observational, it was deeply intuitive, a direct perception of unconscious content that most people could only experience indirectly, if at all. Jung documented that this patient's abilities were both a gift and a burden. While she could read social dynamics with remarkable precision, this clarity came at a significant personal cost. She could not engage in casual conversations or small talk because doing so required ignoring truths she could not unsee. Friendships and professional relationships proved difficult to sustain, as people often felt exposed or vulnerable around her, reacting with discomfort, defensiveness, or even hostility. Even mundane social interactions could trigger profound fatigue, leaving her emotionally drained. Jung realized that he was not dealing with pathology in the traditional sense. He was observing the effects of consciousness operating beyond the typical limits of social perception. This patient exemplified what Jung would later describe as undifferentiated intuitive perception, a state in which extraordinary sensitivity to unconscious realities overwhelmed ordinary social functioning. She was able to detect hidden motivations and subtle emotional undercurrents that shaped the behavior of everyone around her. Jung recorded with careful attention her observations of others. She could identify lies that went unnoticed by friends, predict conflicts before they erupted, and sense the unspoken emotional burdens carried by family members and colleagues. Her perception was precise, consistent, and verifiable, yet it generated intense psychological strain for her, because the human mind is not naturally equipped to process such vast amounts of unconscious information without risk of overwhelm. Moreover, Jung noticed that her remarkable insight provoked reactions from others that were both predictable and profoundly troubling. When she revealed an observation, even gently, people would often react defensively or project their own hidden discomfort onto her. This pattern, which Jung would later label as shadow projection, demonstrated how highly perceptive individuals can become inadvertent mirrors for the unconscious contents of those around them. Her clarity, rather than being appreciated, frequently caused irritation, blame, or avoidance. In essence, she was punished socially for simply seeing what others could not or would not acknowledge. Jung's work with this patient led him to a crucial insight. The human psyche has a natural limit for how much unconscious content can be perceived and integrated without significant strain. Those whose perception exceeds this limit, as in the case of his patient, are at risk of profound isolation, emotional exhaustion, and identity confusion. They live in a state of constant tension between their extraordinary awareness and the unpreparedness of the surrounding social environment. In such cases, Jung noted, it is not the individual's perception that is dangerous, it is the combination of superior perception and society's inability to accept it that produces the real psychological peril. Through this patient, Jung began to map the contours of what he would later define as the introverted intuitive type, rare, highly perceptive individuals who sense the unspoken truths, hidden emotions, and unconscious patterns of the world around them. He recognized that while their abilities could be transformative, they were also potentially destructive if left unintegrated. The challenge was not to diminish their perception, but to develop strategies for maintaining personal identity, social engagement, and psychological stability while carrying the immense weight of what they naturally perceived. Segment 3. Expanded Version. As Jung continued to observe his patient, he realized that her extraordinary perception was not simply a matter of heightened awareness. It was a complex interaction between intuition, emotional sensitivity, and the unconscious minds of those around her. She seemed to absorb more than just observable behavior. She absorbed moods, suppressed thoughts, and subtle tensions that others themselves might not even recognize. This led Jung to explore what he would later call participation mystique, a state in which highly perceptive individuals unconsciously merge with the psychological content of others. The patient described experiences in which she felt as if she were living not only her own emotions, but the feelings, anxieties, and unresolved conflicts of everyone in her environment. The boundaries between her own inner world and the collective unconscious became blurred, creating both insight and vulnerability. Jung documented that this phenomenon was far more than anecdotal. The patient could consistently predict events and behaviors that others could not anticipate, not through logical deduction, but through an intuitive assimilation of psychological patterns. She could sense when someone was on the verge of emotional breakdown, detect hidden insecurities, and even anticipate subtle power struggles in group settings. Her ability to perceive what others unconsciously ignored or denied provided her with insights that were nothing short of extraordinary. Yet, the very same ability that made her exceptional also exposed her to profound social risk. She became a mirror in which the hidden, often unpleasant aspects of human nature were reflected, and people frequently recoiled from that reflection. This insight led Jung to an unsettling realization. Perception itself can be dangerous when it exceeds collective readiness. The patient's awareness illuminated truths that most people are not prepared to face, and society, in turn, responded defensively. She became a target for criticism, blame, and social rejection, often receiving accusations of being negative, judgmental, or intrusive. In effect, her perception threatened the unspoken agreements and shared illusions that allow social groups to function smoothly. Jung wrote that the person who sees too clearly often becomes a scapegoat, bearing the projections of others' unacknowledged fears, guilt, or insecurities. This dynamic, while unconscious in the general population, had a devastating impact on highly perceptive individuals, isolating them and placing immense psychological strain on their minds and bodies. Through careful observation, Jung also identified patterns in how different perceptive individuals processed these overwhelming inputs. Some absorbed emotions so deeply that they could not distinguish between their own feelings and those of others, experiencing perpetual emotional contagion that left them exhausted and sometimes despondent. Others analyzed patterns of behavior and thought with a level of clarity that enabled them to predict outcomes with uncanny accuracy. But this analytical capacity sometimes left them socially detached or misunderstood. A third group seemed to experience physical manifestations of psychological states, feeling tensions, fatigue, or early signs of illness that mirrored the unconscious states of those around them. And then there were the rarest types, individuals who perceived everything yet struggled to organize or communicate these insights, living in a state of continuous overwhelm. Jung's reflections on his patient and others like her revealed that superior perception was not inherently pathological. Rather, it carried inherent risks when unintegrated. The danger lay in the psychological and social consequences of perceiving realities that others could not or would not acknowledge. Over time, he came to understand that these individuals require a unique form of guidance and integration, a process that allows them to retain their extraordinary abilities while protecting their sense of identity and maintaining meaningful connections. Without such integration, their gifts can become burdensome, isolating them from others and even from their own authentic selves. Ultimately, Segment 3 underscores the central tension of Jung's discovery. Extraordinary perception can be both illuminating and perilous. It allows access to layers of reality unseen by most, but it simultaneously exposes the perceiver to social and psychological hazards. The task, Jung realized, was not to limit perception, but to develop strategies that would allow the individual to navigate the world with this heightened awareness safely, constructively, and with a sense of purpose. This understanding laid the foundation for his later work on the individuation process, which seeks to balance perception, integration, and conscious engagement with both the self and the collective. Segment 4. Expanded Version. Jung's observations soon revealed that the rare individuals with extraordinary perception did not all experience their gifts in the same way. In fact, he began to classify them according to how their differentiated intuition interacted with the world around them. The first pattern he noted were those he called feeling intuitives. These individuals did not merely observe emotions, they absorbed them almost physically into their own psyche. When someone around them experienced anxiety, sadness, or suppressed anger, they felt it as if it were their own. This heightened empathic sensitivity gave them an extraordinary capacity for understanding and connecting with others, but it came at a cost. They often became overwhelmed by the emotions they absorbed, unable to disentangle their own inner experiences from those of the people around them. Daily interactions could leave them mentally drained, emotionally taxed, and socially isolated. Jung documented that without conscious practices to differentiate self from others, feeling intuitives could easily lose their sense of identity, wandering through life as a repository for the unconscious burdens of those around them. The second pattern Jung identified was the thinking intuitives. Unlike the feeling type, these individuals processed the world with astonishing analytical clarity, perceiving not only surface behaviors, but the unconscious patterns that underlie human actions. They could predict conflicts before they arose, foresee breakdowns in relationships or institutions, and recognize the hidden dynamics that governed social interactions. This ability, however, often alienated them, because they could see the logical consequences of unconscious processes before anyone else. Their insights were frequently met with skepticism, resistance, or outright hostility. People found it difficult to relate to them, perceiving them as overly critical or detached. Yet for those who learned to integrate their gift consciously, thinking intuitives became remarkable strategists, advisors, and guides capable of anticipating outcomes with precision that bordered on prophetic. The third pattern consisted of what Jung called sensation intuitives. These individuals experienced the world through a profound sensitivity to physical manifestations of psychological states. They could sense fatigue, illness, or tension before others were even aware of it, detecting the subtle bodily cues that reflected the unconscious and conscious conflicts of those around them. Their perception acted as an early warning system, providing invaluable insights into the health and emotional well-being of their environment. However, like the other types, this gift could become overwhelming. Constantly attuned to the physical and emotional states of others, they risked being pulled out of their own equilibrium, living in a perpetual state of heightened alert that left them vulnerable to exhaustion and emotional depletion. Finally, Jung described the pure intuitives, the rarest and most extreme type. These individuals perceived everything, the conscious and unconscious, the overt and hidden, the subtle psychological patterns that escaped nearly all others. But unlike the other types, they struggled to organize or express these perceptions coherently. The sheer volume of insights they received often led to confusion, overwhelm, and a sense of disorientation. They lived in a state of constant psychic bombardment, inundated with information that their minds could scarcely process. Jung observed that without careful guidance and structured practices, pure intuitives could be consumed by their own gifts, unable to function socially or maintain a stable sense of self. Through these classifications, Jung began to understand that extraordinary perception was not a uniform ability, but a spectrum of differentiated functions, each with its own strengths, vulnerabilities, and integration challenges. The core danger, he realized, was consistent across all types. Perception without conscious integration could lead to psychological isolation, social rejection, and even identity dissolution. The very awareness that allowed these individuals to see what others could not also place them in positions of profound risk, both emotionally and socially. Jung's insights into these perceptive types illuminated a central truth. The mind's capacity to perceive beyond ordinary limits is a double-edged sword. It offers extraordinary insight, awareness, and understanding, but it simultaneously exposes the perceiver to unique forms of social and psychological vulnerability. Integration, therefore, became paramount. Without a deliberate process to differentiate self from absorbed external content, individuals with these gifts risked being overwhelmed by the very perceptions that defined them. Jung's later work on the individuation process and the development of psychological boundaries stemmed directly from these early observations, providing a roadmap for harnessing extraordinary perception without succumbing to its dangers. Segment 5. Expanded version. Jung realized that the dangers of superior perception extended beyond individual suffering. They had profound social consequences as well. Individuals with highly differentiated intuition often became targets of what he called shadow projection. When someone perceives the unconscious contents of others with clarity, they inadvertently act as a mirror for everyone's hidden fears, desires, and unresolved conflicts. People who encounter such mirrors rarely react with gratitude or understanding. Instead, they project their own unconscious shadows onto the perceiver. This projection could manifest as anger, resentment, hostility, or exclusion. In everyday life, a highly perceptive person might notice a subtle lie, unspoken tension, or hidden sorrow, only to be accused of creating drama, being judgmental, or inventing problems that don't exist. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his clinical practice. It was not that these individuals caused problems, but that they revealed what was already there, exposing the uncomfortable truths that others preferred to ignore. The impact of this dynamic on personal relationships was particularly significant. Highly perceptive individuals often struggled to maintain friendships or partnerships. Their extraordinary awareness created a kind of psychic isolation. While they could understand and sense the emotions and motives of those around them with remarkable accuracy, most people could not handle being seen so clearly. They became the unintended bearers of collective discomfort, carrying the unacknowledged emotions and unresolved issues of everyone in their environment. Jung noted that these individuals often described feeling like outsiders, observing the world from a distance rather than participating fully in it. Even when surrounded by family, friends, or colleagues, they could feel profoundly alone, burdened by the weight of perceptions that others could neither acknowledge nor comprehend. At the same time, Jung observed that the social rejection these individuals faced was not arbitrary. It followed a predictable psychological pattern. The more clearly a person perceived the unconscious contents of others, the more likely they were to become a target of projection and blame. They might be accused of stirring trouble or being overly sensitive, even when their observations were accurate and benign. This pattern reflected a universal human defense mechanism. It is far easier to externalize blame than to confront the parts of ourselves that make us uncomfortable. Highly perceptive individuals, in this sense, were continually tested by the unconscious reactions of those around them, facing repeated social and psychological challenges simply for perceiving too clearly. Jung also recognized the existential dimension of this struggle. The very act of perceiving beyond the ordinary placed these individuals in a state of heightened consciousness, a level of awareness that most people never reach. This advanced perception created a tension between the perceiver and the collective unconscious of society. While the individual might see patterns, truths, and hidden dynamics that could benefit everyone, the collective often rejected or resisted these insights. The perceiver, therefore, faced not only social isolation, but a profound psychological challenge: how to reconcile extraordinary awareness with the limitations, resistance, and unconscious defenses of others. To navigate this complex terrain, Jung developed the concept of the individuation process, a structured method for integrating superior perception while maintaining personal identity and psychological health. Individuation involved recognizing which perceptions belonged to oneself and which originated from the unconscious contents of others, learning to process these insights without becoming overwhelmed, and gradually developing the ability to engage with others' psychological realities without losing oneself. It was a delicate balance. Too little differentiation could result in psychic contamination, while too little integration could lead to isolation and dysfunction. Jung emphasized that this process was essential not only for personal survival, but for fulfilling the potential of superior perception. Those who succeeded could use their gifts to benefit society, serving as bridges between conscious awareness and the unseen psychological currents shaping collective life. Moreover, Jung highlighted that the manner in which perceptive individuals approached their insights could determine whether their abilities became a source of empowerment or suffering. Those who reacted with judgment, criticism, or attempts to control others often amplified their isolation, triggering defensive reactions and intensifying the shadow projections they faced. Conversely, perceivers who cultivated self-awareness, humility, and deliberate engagement could transform their insights into constructive influence, providing guidance, empathy, and clarity to others without being consumed by the psychological material they absorbed. In this way, Jung demonstrated that the danger of seeing more than others lies not in perception itself, but in the failure to integrate it consciously. Segment 6. Expanded version. Jung observed that not all individuals with superior perception reacted to their abilities in the same way. Through his clinical work, he identified 4 distinct patterns among highly perceptive, introverted, intuitive types, each representing a unique mode of processing the unconscious contents of others. Understanding these patterns was essential because each type faced different challenges, and the integration strategies needed to maintain psychological stability varied accordingly. The first type, the feeling intuitive, absorbed emotions from their environment so deeply that they often could not distinguish between their own feelings and those of others. For these individuals, simply being present in social situations could result in a flood of emotions that were not originally theirs. They experienced other people's fears, anxieties, and suppressed desires as if they were personal, often resulting in intense emotional fatigue or confusion. Jung observed that this type lived in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, and without careful boundaries or disciplined reflection, they risked losing touch with their own authentic identity. Yet, when properly integrated, feeling intuitives could offer profound empathy and understanding, becoming healers and compassionate guides in relationships and communities. The second type, the thinking intuitive, approached the unconscious with analytical clarity. These individuals perceived patterns, logical connections, and probable outcomes from the hidden dynamics around them. Unlike feeling intuitives, their sensitivity manifested in predictive power. They could foresee relational conflicts, organizational disruptions, or behavioral outcomes long before they became obvious to others. Jung noted that this type had a remarkable capacity to anticipate consequences, not through rational calculation alone, but by intuitively reading the subtle psychological forces at play. The danger for them, however, was arrogance or over-identification with their insight. Without careful integration, their predictions could create distance from others, foster judgment, or inadvertently impose a sense of superiority. The third type, the sensation intuitive, experienced others' unconscious contents physically. They could detect tension in a room, sense illness before symptoms appeared, or feel the bodily manifestations of psychological distress. This type served as an early warning system, providing crucial information about the health and well-being of those around them. Yet, their heightened sensitivity could also overwhelm them. In absorbing the somatic and emotional states of others, they risked blurring the line between their own physical and psychic reality and that of those they observed. Jung emphasized that the sensation intuitive required practices to anchor themselves and distinguish between personal experience and absorbed external information, or else their superior perception could lead to chronic stress, anxiety, or somatic disturbances. Finally, the fourth type, the pure intuitive, represented the rarest pattern. These individuals perceived everything, thoughts, emotions, and hidden motives, but often struggled to organize or articulate their insights. Their awareness was vast and undifferentiated, which could result in constant overwhelm, mental exhaustion, and difficulty functioning in daily life. Jung documented that without structured methods of integration, pure intuitives could easily feel lost or paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their perceptions. However, with disciplined self-reflection, solitude, and psychological techniques, they could transform their overwhelming insight into visionary understanding, capable of contributing to both individual and collective evolution. Jung's identification of these types was not merely academic, it offered practical guidance for those gifted with heightened perception. By recognizing one's pattern, an individual could implement strategies that match their specific sensitivities. Techniques such as daily periods of solitude, reflective journaling, and conscious engagement with psychological content help to maintain boundaries while allowing the perceiver to harness their abilities constructively. Jung emphasized that integration was not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing practice, requiring vigilance, self-awareness, and adaptive methods to prevent the pitfalls of overload, isolation, or shadow projection. Moreover, Jung's research suggested that the successful integration of superior perception had profound implications beyond personal well-being. Individuals who managed their abilities consciously could serve as bridges between the conscious and unconscious realms, helping society to process hidden psychological content that otherwise remained unacknowledged. They could bring clarity to situations, mediate conflicts, and foster understanding where unexamined fears or unspoken truths created tension. In this way, the perceptive individual had the potential to contribute not only to personal evolution, but also to the collective development of human consciousness, transforming the very danger of their gift into a vehicle for societal advancement. Segment 7. Expanded version. Jung's observations led him to conclude that the danger of superior perception was not only psychological, but also social. Individuals with heightened awareness often faced unconscious resistance from those around them. When someone could see what others refused to acknowledge, their fears, insecurities, hidden motives, or unresolved conflicts, these perceivers were frequently met with hostility, projection, or avoidance. Jung described this as the phenomenon of shadow projection. Essentially, the clearer the perception, the more likely it was to trigger defensive reactions in others. People unconsciously attacked the perceiver, not for any wrongdoing, but because they were forced to confront parts of themselves they had repressed. This created a precarious dynamic. The perceptive individual, despite their insight and awareness, could become a scapegoat in social situations. In families, workplaces, or social groups, their clarity often made others uncomfortable, provoking irrational blame or exclusion. Jung repeatedly documented cases where individuals with differentiated intuition were accused of negativity, judgment, or manipulation, simply because they reflected truths others were unwilling to face. Over time, this social friction led to chronic stress, alienation, and, in extreme cases, psychological breakdown. The perceiver's greatest strength, their ability to see clearly, became their greatest source of suffering. Jung emphasized that this danger was amplified when perception was not consciously integrated. Those who failed to recognize the boundaries between their own inner world and the unconscious content of others were especially vulnerable. Without this differentiation, the perceiver absorbed unresolved tensions, repressed emotions, and unacknowledged desires from their environment. They could lose track of their own needs, feelings, and identity, gradually becoming enmeshed in the psychological currents of those around them. This state, which Jung called participation mystique, was one of subtle but profound psychological risk. It could lead to identity dissolution, where the individual's authentic self was obscured by the weight of absorbed unconscious material. Yet Jung also observed that successful integration could transform this danger into an extraordinary advantage. Individuals who learn to establish psychological boundaries, reflect on absorbed material, and consciously engage with the unconscious of others could channel their perception constructively. They became mediators, healers, and guides, capable of illuminating hidden patterns in relationships, organizations, and communities. Through disciplined practice, the perceptive individual could convert what initially seemed a curse into a rare and invaluable gift. Jung outlined specific methods to achieve this integration. Regular solitude was crucial, allowing the perceiver to disentangle their own thoughts and emotions from those they absorbed. Shadow work, the deliberate examination and acknowledgement of one's own suppressed qualities, helped prevent projection onto others. Mindful observation, combined with reflective practices like journaling, enabled the individual to interpret insights without judgment or compulsion. Over time, these practices allowed the highly perceptive individual to maintain both clarity and composure, protecting themselves from overwhelm while engaging meaningfully with their social and cultural environment. Importantly, Jung recognized that the evolutionary potential of superior perception extended beyond personal development. Individuals who successfully integrated their abilities often acted as bridges for collective consciousness. They could bring unspoken truths to light, guide others toward self-awareness, and catalyze growth in social and cultural systems. In this way, the challenge of superior perception, its inherent isolation and difficulty, was inseparable from its transformative potential. What could have been purely destructive, if mishandled, became a vehicle for both personal and societal evolution when navigated with skill and awareness. Finally, Jung stressed that these processes were neither quick nor easy. The integration of superior perception required persistent effort, self-honesty, and strategic engagement with the world. The perceptive individual had to learn not only to see clearly, but also to act wisely, cultivating relationships with others capable of understanding and supporting their experience. The rewards were profound, not just survival in a world that resisted their clarity, but the ability to serve as conscious pioneers, preparing humanity for psychological challenges and opportunities that collective awareness had yet to recognize. Segment 8. Expanded Version. Jung concluded his exploration by emphasizing the ultimate purpose of integrating superior perception, transforming what initially appeared as a burden into a gift, both for the individual and for society. He described the final stage of development as the ability to engage with the unconscious contents of others without losing one's own identity, a state he called the transcendent function. In this phase, the perceptive individual no longer experiences clarity as a curse or a source of isolation. Instead, they wield it consciously, balancing awareness with wisdom, insight with restraint, and perception with discernment. At this stage, the individual recognizes that their perception is not meant to dominate or correct others, but to serve as a bridge between what is unconscious and what can be brought into conscious awareness. By observing patterns, emotional undercurrents, and hidden motivations, they illuminate paths for understanding, healing, and growth. Yet this service is undertaken without attachment, without compulsion to control outcomes, and without seeking validation. Jung emphasized that the true measure of integration lies not in how much one sees, but in how skillfully one navigates the psychological consequences of seeing too much. Jung's reflections also highlighted the relational dimension of this stage. Perceptive individuals must cultivate connections with others who can tolerate, contain, and reflect back their insights without defensiveness. These relationships serve as psychological anchors, preventing overwhelm and fostering continued growth. Jung referred to these individuals as fellow containers, or members of a conscious minority capable of witnessing and supporting the perceptive individual's journey. Through such interactions, the highly sensitive perceiver can maintain balance, develop emotional resilience, and channel their insights into constructive and transformative action. Moreover, Jung emphasized that the integration of superior perception is not a static achievement. It is an ongoing process, requiring continual reflection, adjustment, and self-awareness. Stress, trauma, and major life transitions can temporarily disrupt boundaries, reactivating the risks of absorption, overwhelm, and social friction. The perceptive individual must remain vigilant, practicing solitude, reflective exercises, and shadow work to preserve clarity and maintain their psychological integrity. These practices reinforce not only personal stability, but also the capacity to contribute meaningfully to the collective consciousness. Finally, Jung offered a profound insight about the evolutionary significance of these individuals. He observed that those who successfully integrate superior perception often act as pioneers for collective consciousness, anticipating social, cultural, and psychological developments before the majority is ready to perceive them. By navigating their perception with wisdom and restraint, they prepare humanity to engage with deeper truths, fostering understanding, empathy, and growth across communities. Their journey illustrates the delicate balance between awareness and survival, perception and integration, insight and service. In essence, Jung's most dangerous discovery, the extraordinary perception that can isolate, overwhelm, or destroy, also contains the potential for extraordinary transformation. When integrated consciously, superior perception allows individuals to evolve beyond conventional limitations, transforming their clarity into a resource that benefits both themselves and the larger society. The perceptive individual moves from isolation to connection, from burden to gift, and from confusion to conscious influence. This final stage demonstrates that the danger is not inherent in seeing too much, but in failing to develop the skills and awareness necessary to navigate the consequences wisely. Jung's work ultimately reminds us that advanced perception, when coupled with disciplined integration, becomes a form of cultural medicine. It allows highly sensitive and perceptive individuals to harness their insights, engage responsibly with the unconscious world, and participate in shaping collective consciousness. Their journey is a testament to the power of human awareness, illustrating that the most profound psychological challenges often lead to the most transformative contributions when approached with patience, humility, and conscious strategy.